Seconds. I know we should be starting with a recap of day one, and we had Marlene graciously volunteered. She didn't volunteer; she was volunteered by the in-house professor. Right, and so Marlene will just do a quick recap for us of yesterday, some of the key concepts, and then we'll also allocate just a few minutes for any of you who'd like to share any new thing that you may have learned yesterday, or to make any recommendation. So before we get to that though, Ezra, are there any housekeeping matters you'd want to take care of?
Yeah, I was just going to do that, and thanks for mentioning that folks should let us know what something new to learn from this week's.
Ezra, you have to unmute yourself.
Unmute, yeah. That's a housekeeping matter.
Yes, once again, good morning, everyone. I just was thanking Nigel for saying that we should all share something we learned new about ICH yesterday, or something new you learned about the workshop, during the workshop yesterday. But before we go to the this morning's presenter, as far as a summary of what took place yesterday, I want to share with you some of the participation data we saw online yesterday and also live. So we had let's see, 4 platforms. We had the live audience, we had Zoom, we had Facebook, and we had YouTube. And we had 11 folks present live at the Coyoba Hotel. We had 55 people on Zoom, and on Facebook we had 238 people reaching the session, but only 42 were engaged, and YouTube 6. So that's a nice mix. And Nigel, I think that sort of legitimate the method that was used, which is the multi-platform method, which, as you said, is a new approach to conducting these types of workshops. So I will say, give you a big shout out, Nigel, for the experiment, and I think that it's up and running and it's looking good.
Yeah.
I just want to reflect before Marlene goes that to bring back a unit of analysis yesterday was ICH, that is intangible cultural heritage. That's what we're studying. And there was a lot of discussion about risk factors about that ICH faces. And there was not much conversation about the transmission of that information, which is something I think we may want to focus some more on. There was a lot of discussion about the safeguarding processes and also on inventorying. So I think that one of the things that we need to do moving forward is to focus a lot more on the knowledge part, which is cultural heritage and the 2003 convention. And I think that will put us in a place that we need to be so that we can understand more deeper the ICH, which is the unit of analysis, and then the explanatory factors like inventorying, transmission, and safeguarding. We need to build that up. Bobby.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I would want to. Good morning, everyone, and I would want to say happy International Women's Day to one and all, female and male. It belongs to all of us. And I just want to mention that in the words of Maya Angelou, all our women are definitely phenomenal. And as we grow our boys and girls to be phenomenal as well, I do trust that our world will be a better place, a more peaceful place. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to summarize. We had a really successful first day workshop, I must say, and a number of the things that were discussed in our training yesterday, I would seek to share with you. We did talk about the 7 UNESCO conventions pertaining to our heritage, to heritage, cultural heritage, 3 for culture and heritage, 3 that speaks to safeguarding the intangible cultural heritage, and 1 that speaks to the diversity of cultural expression. It was important for us to make a distinction between tangible and intangible cultural heritage. And so that was done yesterday. So I'm hoping that because of that, and having had the opportunity to go over the material, we now have a better understanding of what those differences were or are. In yesterday's session, we spoke about the definition of cultural heritage. And a number of persons shared what their perception or what their understanding of it was. One that stood out to me was the fact that communities define the value they place on intangible culture. And our intangible culture is essentially our way of life, you know? And so that is important for us to understand. It is also very important to understand, as was stated yesterday, that we each have different values. And so we need to be careful not to impose what we determine as our culture, or we culture, as was stated yesterday, Mr. Prophet, on others, because culture is, or intangible culture is fluid and changes over time. It's really important, it was stressed yesterday, that culture be transmitted. And that's what makes it very valuable. So the importance of transmitting it from one generation to the other is critical if we are to preserve and promote that which is ours. We looked at the organs of the convention, and they were identified as being the General Assembly, intergovernmental committees, and then of course you have the UNESCO Secretariat. So it's important for us to understand that in terms of moving forward. It was also stated yesterday that one of the challenges that we face in terms of preserving our intangible culture is the risk of over commercializing aspects of our culture, such that it makes us, so in some cases, lose valuable elements of our culture. So as much as we can focus on sharing, sharing with visitors, sharing with guests, sharing with persons of the various generations, younger generations, it's important for us to be mindful of that to over commercialize it, sometimes it loses its essence, and we don't want that to happen. Also shared with us yesterday by Mr. Nigel is the fact that funding is available, yes, through UNESCO, but it is looked on favorably when funding is applied for jointly. So if you have a number of countries having the same focus or wanting to do the same project and joining together on that particular project, that's something for us to consider here in Grenada. I was thinking as well that Patois, for example, which is a language, may not be considered as intangible heritage, but it is one through which intangible heritage can be transmitted. And so there, while it may not be as alive in Grenada right now, but there are many countries in the Caribbean in which it is alive. So if we can team up, learn from that, it might be a good way of killing 2 or 3 birds with one stone. Also spoken about yesterday is the fact that while the funding is available, there are obligations to persons who receive or countries who receive the funding, and that's something to be mindful of. And some of those obligations include the fact that you need to create an inventory and focus on safeguarding the intangible cultural heritage. Persons receiving funding are also expected to contribute to the fund so as to keep it going, I guess. Apart from the obligations, there are also benefits, and I was happy to hear that stated, because one very clear benefit is the fact that as we safeguard or as we preserve and promote our intangible cultural heritage, it gives us as a people, any people, a sense of pride in their communities, in what makes them who they are. Another benefit stated was the fact that it can contribute to sustainable development, and it enhances persons' ability to be creative. So our human creativity is enhanced through these processes. Other things that were mentioned yesterday was that there are certain key performance indicators that we would look for to determine whether what we're doing in terms of preserving our cultural heritage and measuring the effectiveness of the conventions. And one of the things that was stated was the fact that if you see, after doing all of this, these projects and implementing the conventions, if you see a revival of those aspects of your culture or those elements that you deemed important to preserve, that would be one of the greatest indicators of its importance. I think there are a couple other things I wanted to mention here, but in a nutshell, as we ended the day, we spoke about the ethical concerns regarding collecting data from communities. And it was stressed the importance of giving the communities the opportunity to view and to determine whether you have represented them well. It was mentioned that some communities, especially on the island of Carriacou, is experiencing fatigue because so many persons come and collect information and have been doing that over the years. So that was something that was brought up for us to mention or to be mindful of. And it was also stated that as we document our history, our culture, our cultural heritage, and with the intention of transferring it to the other generation, please note that the younger generation is also establishing their own culture. And that must be mindful as well, or we must be mindful of that as well. And giving them the opportunity to document it right now, not stay as long as we have. So that might be something that we can give them the opportunity to improve. We took a very long time to start this process, but as it has started, let them have the opportunity to document their culture as it evolves. And that may make it a bit more appealing to them to be a part of the whole process. Carnival was spoken about a bit, not very much, but the fact that some of the things that were done over the years would have taken out certain aspects of the culture, especially traditional mass, in the communities. And we must be mindful, as was stated, that this intangible culture belongs to the community. That is where it gets its meaning, in that environment. So if we remove it, we stand the chance of polluting, diluting, and that would not be good for the process. So it needs to remain as much as possible, as close as possible to the people. And that's why I'm guessing the fund is providing the support needed to document in the community or from the community these very important aspects of their culture. So I think that's what I would have gathered from yesterday's session, and other persons are welcome to join or add their salt or 2 cents. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a few things on the different headings I mentioned earlier. On the transmission, the point was made yesterday, I think it was Nigel, that one of the reasons why ICH survives is because the culture behind it is very strong. And that's very important. And he used the example of reggae music. While it's commercialized, the culture behind it is so strong that it dwarfs the commercialization. So that's very important. And that led me to something about community, because I like to give these examples. I grew up in a community that had the busiest road in Grenada. That's the Belmont Main Road, the top road. And something happened. That community had a cooperative society that had a school, it had a credit union, it financed only funerals. And some of the members were responsible for making the coffin. We had bakeries that made about 7 different types of bread. You had Thai bread, you had Vienna bread, you had, about 7 different types. But the point is that with that community, there was a force that we had no control over that just destroyed everything, which is migration. Migration caused the entire collapse of that Belmont community. So that is, when we think in terms of what are the risk factors, sometimes we can point to something like commercialization and so on, but there's some latent forces that's undermining, presenting themselves as barriers to sustainability of ICH. So it's just food for thought. The other piece that I thought was important on the safeguarding is we talk about the linguistic part, and Marlene mentioned that, the patois. You know, that's very important because we sort of are oral societies, you know, we and that's why we have patois. You heard it here one way and you communicated there another way. And that's, you know, it's sort of a either diminishes or enhances, you know, either direction, the importance of transferring knowledge through language is something that we need to protect, to safeguard. Another piece on the inventorying that furthers ICH sustainability is this whole thing about documentation. And I think this conference is about that in a big way, which is we have to document the practices and procedures that bring about these outcomes, these ICH outcomes. And another piece that that Nigel stressed yesterday, and it's I think folks have to really hone in on it. The product or the ends are not what we're interested in. What we're interested in are the skills and the practices that were used to bring about the boat, the mast, and so on. So it's really about honing in on those practices and making sure that they stick around so we can continue to have sustainable ICH. And also keep in mind that ICH, as society changes, it will be fluid and it will sort of be dynamic and showing itself in different ways, but at least it will still be with us. So those are some of the final things that I think that came out yesterday. And like I said, under risk factors, we had most of the discussions, maybe about 60% of the discussion yesterday was about risk factors. That's the things that's undermining the sustainability of ICH. So I just want to go back out to the folks in Zoom land and also in the audience to share any additional things that you didn't hear from Marlene and myself or your colleague next to you. And if you're unwilling to share vocally, you can write it on a piece of paper and hand it in. You don't have to put your names. Maybe you could just write on a blank piece of paper so we can continue to document the experience that you're having during the workshop. And one final thing that I forgot to mention, somebody from Caribou yesterday mentioned about fatigue. You know, there's a lot of fatigue, especially in Caribou. The high demand for information about ICH, and you're going to the same people, there's a lot of fatigue there. So that's something that I think that was stressed a lot yesterday. So anything from a live audience from Zoom land? I'm not seeing anything on the chat, and I'm not hearing voices in the room. So anybody wants to share?
Well, there's a hand raised.
Well, how about if I click
Adriana.
on it? You have a hand up? Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes, and just boom it out. Good morning.
Yeah. So, working at the National Museum, I'm concerned about ICH in the sense of
Ezra, sorry to interrupt, but is it possible to pass the tablet over to her?
They don't hear. Maybe their microphone.
Yeah, okay.
Just 1 second. Sorry about that.
Good morning. I'm Osidel from the International Museum. I'm sorry about the question. I haven't So I'm concerned when we speak about
Question,
ICH, constantly
This thing is
changing.
muted.
That one really hit me yesterday because
Sorry,
No.
Tahira, sorry about that. Is it possible, is the tablet still available where we can pass it over to her maybe?
Okay, you hearing me?
Yes, I think we can now. Yes.
Okay, so when Mr. Nigel spoke about ICH constantly changing, that one really hit me. Because my concern is that we have persons, individuals going around and giving tours to tourists. And sometimes the information passed on to the tourists. Is that correct? Is that factual? Because what I'm thinking before Mr. Nigel said that, it's constantly changing, is that information passed on should be as factual, as close as possible. But you will see 2 or 3 different persons, and these persons are constantly going around and giving tours. But what are they telling the tourists? They are not assigned by or licensed by the ministry to give tours, but they are passing on Grenada's ICH history or heritage. But is it factual? I'm confused about that. I understand it's constantly changing, because to me it's like when you play that game as a child, when you use the can and as a telephone, or that game where you say something to the person and he passes it around, and by the time it comes back, it's changed. I understand that part, but there are aspects of it that I think should be factual. And I've lived here for like 13 years, and I'm constantly in war with some Grenadians about their heritage, the factual part of it. Because to me, it is not being pursued seriously. And it's passed on from hearsay from their parents or grandparents. And when you actually check it out, it's not truthful. So what are we passing on to? What are we passing on to the tourists? This is my concern. Thank you.
Actually, about 2 years ago, the Grenada Tourism Authority instituted a program of training for tour guides and gave them things to wear on their shirts to distinguish, to distinguish those who had received the training from those who didn't. And so they encouraged.
Unmute the speaker. Yeah. Let me try that.
Okay, can I continue? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Maria. Go ahead.
Okay, how much did you all hear?
We didn't hear anything.
Maria, could you go from the top, the very top?
Okay. About 2 years ago, the Grenada Tourism Authority instituted a program of training for tour guides, and those who participated received a... Okay.
Maria, sorry about that. 1 second. Someone needs, we need to mute. Could you mute yourselves, please, just in case?
No speakers. Go ahead. Okay, I got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, ready? Should I start from the top again? Did anybody hear any of it? All right. But before the pandemic, 2.5 years ago, the Grenada Tourism Authority instituted a program of training for tour guides. And those who participated received a sticker they could put on their shirts so that tourists could see who was trained and who wasn't. The intention, of course, was to not allow untrained guides to tell tourists inaccurate information. I'm not sure what happened to that. I don't see any tags anymore. I see all kinds of people doing all kinds of tours. And that's a real concern because some of them have a lot of misinformation. Some of them are not dressed appropriately. Some of them present a picture of who we are as a people that is not something we want tourists to see. So somebody needs to contact the tourism authority. I think Petra Roach is very approachable. She cares about this kind of stuff. So somebody should contact them and raise this concern with them, make them aware of our project.
Thank you for that, Maria. That's good information, and I think you identified a couple solutions already. I know in this regard, the implementation of the convention, especially when you're talking about the ICH perspective, sometimes ICH go with particular spaces, sometimes not, and especially when you're giving a tour and so on. Having tour guides participate in this sort of discussion will also help them. So that's something to think about for the future, possibly with support from tourism. So that's definitely something to revisit. But thank you for bringing us up to speed on that. I know many countries face this a similar dilemma, where I remember standing at a site here in Belize, and you have a little horse and buggy coming by, and I'm standing at a grave site, and the guide is just telling the tourists that Belize's first prime minister is buried there, and that's like, I'm like with my mouth open, it's completely unrelated, you know. I said, oh my goodness. But I saw from an ICH perspective, these are the sorts of things that offers an opportunity for collaboration with tourism, right? To discuss the ICH. You notice Ezra spoke about 7 different types of bread this morning, right? That sort of thing. Those are little nuances that that only having had the experience that you'd be able to pick up on and be able to pass on. And the tour guides, without hearing that sort of thing, they wouldn't have an idea, probably, if they're not immersed in it, as to what sort of knowledge to share in that regard. No? But thank you for that, Maria.
May I come in, please? It's Newton.
Sure, Newton.
Right. This is a concern. Remember, we are a democracy, and there's such a thing as free enterprise. I have seen it, I have listened to people, and I walked away, just like Ezra is saying now. Anybody who's got enough money to buy a minibus and put on a thing on his head can go about talking about tourism, talking about heritage, and quite frankly, they know very little about it. However, and I don't want to point a finger too straightly, I was in attendance yesterday, and there were a number of people there from, if I remember, from tourism. I don't remember anyone from the cultural foundation being there. If you was there and I didn't see you, I didn't notice you, I am sorry. But we have more cooperation. However, I'm hoping one of the outcome of this project will be to bring in the main stakeholders. So if we want to institute training for tour guides, then possibly, not possibly, but definitely, tourism, cultural foundation, national trust, all the other heritage organizations should collaborate to give us a product which we know will contribute to our economic well-being, but also to the knowledge, not just about visitors, but among our own people, because a lot of them know very little about what we're doing. So concern is yes, I agree it's a concern, but there is an opportunity for us to bring things together.
Right.
Thank you, Newton. So let's take a couple more comments. We see Angus and Adriana. I see both of your hands are up. Let's go with Angus first.
Hey, the topic of incorrect information, that is, there's a funny thing, I really don't know how true it is, but supposedly somebody was overheard a guide telling visitors that Sendal Tunnel, the name of Sendal Tunnel came because they sent all the slaves through, send all. I thought it was quite creative.
Uh,
But I think that is a big problem.
Yeah.
It's not just for intangible, but tangible as well. People make up stories, and I think we shouldn't be too hard on people. If we do not have a training program that train guides, I don't think you can blame people for being creative, with telling stories. I think the fault is on the GTA, and they have done, as Marie had pointed out, there were a few projects. I know Michael Jessame in tourism have done a number of training for guides, but I don't know how consistent it is. And I think there's no guides just show up. So there really is no continuous training. One of the other problems I think we'll encounter with, you got the Leapers Hill, the information on the monument that was put up in stone is incorrect. It may be in the wrong place as well, but that's another story. So there are lots of incorrect things because there is no body that basically oversees any of this and has ownership of it. And I think that is a problem for heritage in Grenada. And it's something that if we don't address, none of this stuff we're doing is going to be of value, because who keeps it, who keeps the data, who makes sure that when a monument goes up, the correct data goes on it. When people are doing different projects, making sure that, this happens. When people publish information, is that information correct? So it is something that we have to take into consideration as part of this project, that whoever maintains the database for this has to be the sort of police. Otherwise, we'll get so much bad information out there. It's unbelievable.
Exactly.
Thank you for that. Sorry. This is why the inventorying process is important from an ICH perspective, because that's where you'll capture the living heritage narratives. And this is why inventorying is also a continuous thing. You have to constantly be updating your inventory so that you can track how the living heritage is changing over time, right? So in 50 years, you'll be able to say, this is what it was, and this is what it is. So the implementation of this convention, ladies and gentlemen, is not a thing that is to be done overnight. It's going to be life cycles, no? So we'll leave something behind. Our children, after they become adults and so on and go through, they'll leave something behind and so on. But let's hear from Adriana. Happy International Women's Day to you, Adriana, and to all the ladies here.
Yep.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. One of the things that we want to highlight is the constant concerns, and they are showing up as we move forward with this workshop. It's a matter of several points just go to my mind. One of them is the communication. So again, different organizations, different associations, individuals have done initiatives to preserve, promote, and manage intangible cultural heritage, but we have this gap that we don't know what the neighbors doing. So for example, we met 2 years ago with GTA, and we knew that they have this wonderful, because when we brought the draft of the project, we mentioned we have an educational objective component. It's a strong component for 5th and 6th grade. And they came back and say, we did something similar. So it's not to point it out anybody or any specific organization, it's to raise up again the same issue that we are overlapping and duplicating efforts, because we don't have that mechanism yet, or that platform that we have to see how we're going to do it and who's going to manage it in order to be the police officer, as Angus was stating a few minutes ago, because this has to be visible and available for everyone. So that's the first concern. The second one is a matter of how open or motivated these people who are in first contact. Not only, let's say that we have two types of tourists. And one of the things that we realized with the pandemic is that Grenadian and residents has started to go more around of what we have here. Not only, well, the tangible, we're talking about the tangible and the intangible. So this was as you cannot travel or you were not able to travel, then you focus on what you have, which is a beautiful opportunity that we have there. So let's talk about Grenadians, residents, and those who come as a visitors from foreign countries. So yes, we met with UTA and also with a taxi company. I don't remember the name. Who are the main base office is in the cruise ship Esplanade Mall. And there were not, at that moment, there were not, I mean, we try our best, but we don't see that commitment yet. And we have to come together with a strong approach, policy, and we're not enforcing anybody, but we have to come with something that is strong enough or does a strong echo that they will buy it. They will say, yes, this is important, and I have to change the way that I'm providing the information, because we know that some of them are not providing the accurate information to the tourists. So these are the things that I want to put add under what we were talking about. And again, we have to come together. I don't know how we're going to do it in terms of instead of working separately, how we come together and work together. So thank you.
Adriana, thank you for that. There's an exercise we'll be doing tonight that will help us to try and arrive at some sort of process of negotiation on this.
We're not hearing you, Nigel.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Good. Yes, good.
Yeah, so Adriana was saying that based on what you're saying and some of the discussions here, there's an exercise we'll be doing tonight in terms of a reflection that I think will help with negotiating this process, no? Of figuring out how efforts can be centralized, or, well, let me not use centralized, but efforts can be brought together toward finding a solution for, because I recognize in the region that while we are dealing with intangible, we know that they go together, the tangible and the intangible go together. So the exercise we'll be doing tonight will ask us to make some reflection, and then tomorrow we'll try and see how we can piece that together, given the different entities that are attending this particular workshop. But thank you for that. We're way over time here, but that's fine because we started a little late. But I wanted to mention a couple comments here. I see Margaret saying a suggestion for school curricula. Ezra asked the question about transmission. So there is what you call formal and non-formal transmission of ICH. The non-formal, sorry, some countries go further. They say formal, non-formal, informal, right? And the formal would be things like what you do in schools. You set up curriculum and curricula and so on. And this is part of the initiative that's happening here with the Grenada National Trust Project, Proud of My Heritage. There is what happens at home in terms of intergenerational dialogue from parents to children, grandparents to children, and so on, from neighbor to neighbor, from neighbor to the carnival organizer or the mask maker and that sort of thing, right? So transmission happens in many kind of, but what Margaret is saying here, that they should make school trips obligatory on an annual, not program duration basis. This is something from my childhood, from elementary school until now, as a tour guide annually, whether I think I recall the information or not. Yeah, that makes sense, no? Immersing the children into the community. All right, then we go down here. Gloria is saying, I want to raise the concern of funding for projects. Efforts have been made in the past to document and play some of the folk songs on CDs for use in schools. However, in my investigation, I learned that the monies ran out and it ended right there 3 years ago. So sustainability is always an issue, right? And this is one of the problems with projects. You get money for a time, and then to maintain it over time. So one of the things to try and think about going forward is is there some way for it to generate income, right? In the first instance, something that can pay back for itself or supplement what is needed for the purposes of sustainability. In terms of ICH, this particular convention, the organizers, the state, the beauty about this fund is that as soon as you finish this project and you are able to report on its implementation, successful implementation, and so on, you can start preparing another application to continue the process, right? So that's the beauty of this particular convention, because so far there is money to do it, and it's just about this. You've made an important first step. So sustainability is certainly something to factor in there. And then we have here, there's a part of the social studies curricula called national identity, but there is little or no information for teachers to use. So having the information documented will be key to build knowledge. Now, a key thing here, we're covering a lot of things, but you'll see how it's all coming together. Marlene did an excellent job, by the way, of covering a lot of different areas. Ezra also supported that initiative. But another thing to add to that is what Tahira is saying here, is that with respect to information, a key partner would be your libraries and archives, right? So while there's an active process, of engaging communities and so on and documenting, and by the way, I've thought about that Kariako problem about being overwhelmed, no? Right. I think what has to happen now is that the people from Kariako need to become the documenters now, right? Where they're not being the ones being bombarded, they can go do the documentation, no? To reverse roles, so to speak, and even document what's there for themselves. But that's the training part. But back to this idea, when you do the documentation, there's supposed to be some sort of centralized place where I see what some countries do. They have the library tag along when you're doing documentation. Whatever material is collected, let's say you collect 3-4 hours of footage, for argument's sake. The raw footage is lodged with the library or the archives as resource, and then the refining of it, the production of documentary is done with the implementing institution, and then even after that, it's returned to the library, right? You can create websites and all of these things now to support these sorts of things. So I'm just thinking out loud about what I've seen in some places, no? But we will proceed now. Margaret, I see your hand up. Angus again. There are many things we can discuss in a week, but let's take the 2 comments. Margaret?
Okay, mine is really, really fast, I promise. The question of where to archive and keep all of these records. What is the current program that provides for that under the UNESCO program, if there is one? Because I know there was an emergency one, and then there's another one you can request funding for, but this was sort of a in-betweener. It's not an emergency, but at the same time, it's necessary. Like, we don't have anywhere to keep costumes and things. And I saw in Nigeria where the program provided I guess a wardrobe, a physical structure where they could keep the traditional costumes for a certain kind of festival they have in Nigeria. That's just where my head went with while you were talking. So just once we get to it, if not now, later.
Well, I would have to defer to Yuri Peshkov, who is the culture program specialist of culture here. If Yuri is here, maybe he could respond quickly. I know there's a Memory of the World initiative, but that's for archival records that have a universal value. But if you're here, could you comment on that, please?
Can I chime in?
Yes, go ahead.
There's an earlier reference that was made to a CD that was put off of folk music. Something was actually done. I have a copy of a CD and a booklet that came with it. So something did come out of that project. I don't know how extensive it was or what it was supposed to have accomplished, but something did come out of it, which the government from the Ministry of, I think it was either culture or tourism that he did that project some years ago. So that stuff was produced. Unfortunately, Grenada, we do not have an archives or library. That building has been shut down since 2011. And there really was never any place that actually took in our heritage. I think the library, the archives was just a collection of stuff. There was never anything cataloged or anything like that. The library, again, had a West Indian collection, but I'm not quite sure there really was an emphasis to collect specific Grenadian culture. So there is a huge, massive absence of any preservation of any material in terms of Grenada's culture. And that's why we have problems that everybody keeps going to Carriacou when they want to find stuff, because there is nowhere else to go. There is no collection of anything anywhere. And
check the chat.
Really
I put in some information to that effect too in the chat, Angus. So it's there, just like you. They're pieces. It's like confetti. It's aggravating. As soon as you reach for one piece, you know.
Right.
So the people in Carriacou are the living archives.
Right, and that's one of the things. One of the things that I've been doing is actually building an archive of Grenada's history and culture. That is something I've been personally working, and I've approached since the 1990s. I have actually produced an archives plan that I've shared with everybody. I've met with the Governor General at that time, met with Prime Minister talking about archives. I've presented papers at different conferences, and we have never seen anything come out of that. It's never been a priority to preserve culture, despite many governments talking about heritage. We have never seen anything done towards the preservation of Grenada's heritage and culture in that capacity. And that's why we have the problem where we are today, that we're doing an inventory project, but we have nothing to really start with. We're basically started from scratch.
Interesting. All right, that's an important.
May I come in after?
That's an important. Please? 1 second, Newton. Thank you. 1 second, but that's an important fact to know, because going forward, then the implementers will have to develop some system of data storage and data collection, so that if and when an archive system does come around, that can be passed over in duplicate or so on. So that is going to be a critical exercise. Is where do you keep your inventory? Sorry, go ahead, Newton.
No, I have no brief to speak on behalf of the Grenada National Museum. But Angus, I can assure you that one or two of us have been talking about doing our own local collection until we're in a position to revive the archive or revive an archive. So if you have any material at all, will you kindly get in touch with me, and I would speak to other people on the board to see what we can do. But yes, I agree with you. Nothing has been done for a very, very long time. And there's no apparent evidence that anything is being done.
All right. So with that, if we can bring this discussion to an end, we way over time, but very important, because we captured some of the concerns that relate to this project as well. But so getting a database, digital and hard copy record keeping system will be critical for this project. And then working long-term with some entity, and Newton referenced the museum. I was thinking the same thing in my head just now. Perhaps if there's a national museum, I know the young lady who introduced herself yesterday from the museum, I can't recall her name. So, perhaps this is a project that UNESCO can be approaching a different context to look at with respect to a museum. I know Adriana referenced that just now. But we can talk about this after as well, no? Ezra, is there anything observation you want to glean so we can close the session, please?
Not this time. We got to move on.
All right.
We overdue.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So on the screen now, you will see the timetable. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're way behind, but no problem. You'll find that a lot of what has been discussed and you have raised will continue to reemerge, perhaps in a more technical way in terms of the convention, but you'll see that it comes up as we progress through the workshop. So here, today we'll be looking at Unit 4, who can do what in implementing the convention. Unit 5, raising awareness, and then there's a little bit longer session on identification and inventory. At the close of the day, there'll be 2 assignments. One applying to one group of people and another assignment applying to another group of persons. One assignment will target the knowledge bearers, practitioners, and so on, and persons involved with ICH elements. And another assignment will involve persons who work for various institutions, Ministry of Education, Tourism, and so on. So that's thinking ahead. And at the end of the day, we'll be giving you that assignment. Not very, it's not a 500-word essay or anything like that. It will be graded, by the way. I'm just kidding. I wish I could play that, but no problem. So we'll deal with that at the end of the day. So let's close this then, and then we will proceed to today's unit 4, which is who can do what in the convention. Please let me know if you can see the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Can you see are you seeing 2 screens or two or just one?
2.
You're seeing 2? Okay, let me do something here. Sorry. You're seeing 1 now?
Yes.
So in this presentation, we'll look at an example from Japan, the Yamahoko float ceremony. Who are the stakeholders, the role of communities, the role of NGOs, experts, centers of expertise, and research institutions, multiple stakeholders and multiple activities. So this is a case study to get us thinking about ICH and its various actors. Who does what in ICH, in safeguarding? So here's an example from Japan, the Yamahoko float ceremony, part of the Kyoto Gion Festival in Japan. So it's a float procession in the streets of Kyoto. This was inscribed on the representative list in 2009. The communities, the persons who are involved, begin with the craftsmen. They work together. You can see an example of it there. To preserve and repair a float decorated with wooden carvings. Now, as we go through this, think of particular elements in Grenada, Carriacou, Petit, Martinique, and the other smaller islands. Think of particular elements and how there are different layers of involvement, right? Because sometimes we think that the safeguarding of a thing is the responsibility of just the person who has the particular skill, right? So these men, you see them working on this particular float, and you notice the elaborate wood carvings that are on there. And the interesting thing about it is, if there isn't a place for them to share this, for argument's sake, do you think that the element would continue to survive? Or if there isn't a particular use? The chances are no. Its survival will be strained. It won't be viable because, in other words, they'd be practicing a particular skill that might not have any use or any extended involvement by the community at large. So they're at the center of this element in a sense. So what happens in terms of other participants? The local residents participate by attending, pulling floats, playing music, and performing various preparatory tasks as members of residents associations that are responsible for the different floats. So like if you're in Carnival in the Bahamas or in anywhere in the Caribbean, you have different, what you call it, mass camps, no? Right? Is that correct? Mass camps, where you might call it something else. And so these are the different communities coming together to put together their particular costumes and floats and so on that would go into Carnival. But this is a different manifestation in terms of how it's done in Japan. And so the Foundation for the Gion Festival Preservation Association coordinates the activities, right? So you can see a different layer of participation here. The municipal government helps with logistics. The provincial or prefectural government funds and supports the initiative. The national government funds and creates legislative structures. So what do you observe here? You observe that there are different roles for different actors. There's a role for the skilled craftsman. There's a role for the communities in which these craftsmen and floats can be found. There's a role for the municipal government. There's a role for the provincial government. And there's a role for national government. Different layers of participation revolving around one cultural element. Local weaving and metalworking firms repair and replace necessary objects. There's a place for other craftspersons and skilled persons. The National Research Institute and universities undertake research, right? So there's a function for the education institutions. A similar scenario would be in Trinidad, for argument's sake, where the students who do cultural studies in Trinidad, for argument's sake. I've observed where many of them do their PhD work on carnival in Trinidad or in other places, and they go immerse themselves in the element, and they go do studies about participation, about the economic impact on the community, about the types of ICH that's present. So this gives you a full sense of just how extensive a single element is. The challenge for you now in Grenada is to think about each of your elements in this way, right? And the wider the circle of participation, the better it is for viability of the element, right? It reduces the concept of it being endangered. There's a sustainable development component to the festival. The community members plant red pine saplings to secure future materials used for the floats in a sustainable manner. And this is something that we don't often think about. What would the forest have to do with the floats? Well, the floats are made of wood. The wood comes from a particular area, and especially if it's scarce, whether it's scarce or not, the idea is to have some initiative to replace it so that it's just not a system of the exploitation and exhaustion of resources. But oddly enough, one of the things we find with our knowledge bearers across the world and even in the region, we find that our knowledge bearers, our practitioners in these particular fields, you'll find that they're conscious of the availability of these particular resources. And oftentimes, they in their own way, they try to find ways to ensure that there is a constant supply of it. And in many ways, sometimes that involves planting or requesting that certain areas be set off as reserve lands and so on. No? So there's an environmental sustainability issue as well in this context. And it may well be the case for other elements here in Grenada and around the world. No? So something to think about there. So again, the circle keeps widening from the practitioner to the community associations, to the municipal authorities, the national authorities, the legislative authorities, the education institutions, and now you have the environmental component. You wouldn't be able to see the direct link between these persons planting and the craftsmen, but there is a link. Who are the stakeholders? You've seen them here in that example. They're the state parties, communities, groups, and individuals concerned, NGOs, researchers, centers of expertise, and research institutions. The role of the state. So here are 4 corners as to what has been through experience and an observation. What are some of the roles of the state parties at the national level with respect to the convention? One role might be creating a legal and administrative context for safeguarding. Right? I don't know, and you will probably be able to say this better than myself, but do you have legal framework for protecting ICH in Grenada? Right? Is there some national cultural policy for protecting ICH in Grenada? And I'm just raising this because you don't have to be there as yet, but it's something to think about. Is it something that's necessary? No? The state also has a role to participate in the identification, defining, and inventorying of ICH elements. So how is that playing out in Grenada right now? From my observation, it's playing out where there is a focal point for culture. Correct me if I'm wrong, Darrell. There's a focal point for culture in the ministry with respect to this particular convention. And then the Grenada National Trust has, as an NGO, has been given the task of implementing a particular element, a particular part of the project through, as per this Proud of My Heritage initiative, part of the implementing of the convention. And you see there that you will also be organizing with other community partners the inventorying of ICH elements. You'll be undertaking a sort of pilot exercise for that. But that is facilitated by the state, right? The state works in collaboration with the community NGO to make this possible. There is the role of the state to raise awareness, right? The state oftentimes doesn't think about that, but the state has that role to play. The state ensures the safeguarding of ICH present in their territory. So a Ministry of Culture, for argument's sake, the Ministry of Tourism, right? The education institutions, all of those institutions that get money from the state, that are funded by the state, have a responsibility to ensure that the ICH present in Grenada is safeguarded, right? So you can see the four corners there. And when we talk about a legal, going back to the first point, when we talk about a legal and administrative context for safeguarding, it doesn't always have to be that that immediately you have legal laws or legislation or policy in place. There could be what you'd call a matter-of-fact policy. So where the state, for argument's sake, says that we as a policy will support cultural organizations, right, that are involved in safeguarding. That's a framework too, no? That's something that can be done without much requiring much resources in terms of setting up all sorts of structures. But if there's a decentralized, sometimes they say some people are in favor of a more centralized method for safeguarding culture. Some people are in favor, some states I should say, are in favor of a more centralized method or approach. Some states are in favor of a more decentralized approach. But that depends on the culture of the society, no? Right? Sometimes, and I know for where I come from, the decentralized approach seems to work to the extent that the state supports those initiatives, no? Without, and just walking that fine line of dictating to the community actors what they should be doing. Rather, the community actors tell the state, this is what we're doing, and we'd like for you to support that, right? But that takes a certain kind of thinking at the national and community level, no? A sort of synergy to be developed there. Ezra, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that Grenada has a culture policy, and chances are there are many overlaps with some of what you're sharing. So I was just curious to, if participants can let us know if they're familiar with that policy. And, and if you're not, then I would like you to maybe visit it so you can get some more guidance on many of the aspects Nigel is covering.
Right, thank you for that, Ezra. I think the assignment tonight will also help with that question that you posed. So obligations in the convention, we look at articles 11 and 12 here, and the state parties shall, in terms of its obligation, ensure the safeguarding of ICH in their territory. Now, an interesting thing here, many states ratify the convention, or accede to the convention, but they don't do the follow-up work, right? They don't do the follow-up work. Not realizing, perhaps they do, and there are many factors that contribute to this. And when you ratify something, an international convention or agreement, you're saying that you are agreeing to meet the obligations of what you have agreed to in terms of this international convention. And so what states agree to when they ratify this convention, and there are few obligations in this convention, by the way, but one of those is to safeguard ICH in their territory. To identify and define ICH with the participation of communities, groups, and individuals, and relevant NGOs. To draw up and update inventories of ICH. 3 obligations. The convention does not say how to do it. It just tells you that you need an inventory or inventories, depending on what you want to do. It tells you that you need to work with communities, groups, and individuals, NGOs, and you need to safeguard, however that is done. So it takes a sort of consciousness in that regard. No? Recommendations contained in the convention. State parties are encouraged to adopt a general policy for safeguarding, establish or designate institutions for safeguarding. These are recommendations, by the way. To foster research, to ensure appropriate access to the ICH, to ensure respect for ICH. And central to the convention, in my mind, is to ensure community participation. Again, going back to that comment that we made yesterday, the success of your implementation of the convention in Grenada. And this is just, keep in mind too, I'm not saying the convention is the Bible. No. But I'm just saying, in the context of the convention, in the context of safeguarding without the convention, the success that you will be able to put your finger on will be when you see a vibrant, active community engaged in safeguarding your ICH through its practice, transmission, engagement, interaction, hosting of events, activities, to the point where you have a vibrant cultural life in Grenada. No? Recommendations contained in the operational directives. Remember, operational directives supplement the articles of the convention. They're contained in the text that you had. Ezra, go ahead.
No, it was,
Ezra, I see your hand up. No? Okay. So in the operational directives, recommendations are as follows. State parties try to foster the participation of communities and other stakeholders by or for establishing, coordinating bodies and cooperative networks. Those are operational directives 79 to 80 and 86. So a coordinating body in this case would be the Grenada National Trust. The implementation of the convention through this exercise, what is actually happening here is an opportunity to create cooperative networks. I see persons from education. I see leaders from tourism and culture. I see persons from museum. I see community researchers. I see tour guides. I see students. I see Commonwealth as our CARICOM ambassador. So this is an opportunity, as per the operational directives, to create a cooperative network. It also recommends undertaking capacity building and awareness raising in the communities. This is one such activity now, one that you might be able to replicate in the communities, in the community centers, in the small workshops with different groups. Establishing a directory of expertise. I have in front of me a list that Adriana provided to me. It has a list of 74 persons or so who had agreed to attend, which is excellent, by the way. And I see a much more extensive list, including other persons here who could not attend for one reason or the other. That's the beginning of a directory of expertise. Meaning, remember that circle that we talked about? Persons who might be practitioners or knowledge bearers, who belong to NGOs, who belong to support entities, and that ever-expanding circle. So who might the experts be that we can call upon to safeguard particular ICH or ICH and a whole in Grenada? And of course, facilitating community access to research. Now, this is going to be a challenge for you from what I can, from the discussion I just heard. But one of the things to address it immediately is as you go through the process, set up some database and maybe a website might be an output. I don't know what might be the best ways to make this research accessible currently or through the museum. But certainly, whatever you collect in terms of an inventory, you'll want a visible output that the community can have access to, the schools can have access to, and the teachers can have access to. Further recommendations contained in the operational directives. In raising awareness about the importance of ICH, state parties try to adopt codes of ethics. I will show you when we come back from the break, the ethical considerations adopted by UNESCO. I'll share that with you. Implement appropriate legal protection for communities. Keep the public informed about the importance of and threats to ICH and actions taken. That's critical. One of the roles I used to play in my former life was to work with communities and say, look, we're helping you to safeguard your ICH, but you have to be wary not to be overtaken by commercialization, over-commercialization, right? Because I gave you the example yesterday of the indigenous community. Another thing that would happen, let's say the tourists come into the community and they're teaching them how to make what we call corn cooked in tamales, ground corn cooked in tamales. Instead of grinding the corn, and no, what the communities do is that they go into the town and they buy the corn that's already processed. And then when the tourists come in, they just use that corn and say, oh, this is the authentic thing, right? And that, we were saying, well, that's convenience and so on, but no, what is driving that now is that there is a income being generated through, I'm not saying that's bad, don't get me wrong. You know, the income being generated by tourism forces the community to try and meet more and more the demand, that's an increasing demand. So they find a shortcut. And all of a sudden, the family, they stop planting the corn because they can get it in town, right? The processed corn in town. So that sort of thing. So if you're safeguarding, you have to work with your communities just to be aware of it. You can't tell them what to do, but you want to be aware of what are the factors impacting you, right? You want to promote good safeguarding practices. If you have good initiatives currently in town, in Grenada, you want to endorse and support those. You want to support formal and non-formal education in ICH. But what's an example of non-formal education? Let's say there's a boat builder down by the dock, and he's about 60 something. A good non-formal educate would be to ask him, Mr. Betson, would you mind if I came over with a couple of my sons to see how you do this work on the boats? But I said, sure, come Tom. Come, come anytime you feel like. That's non-formal education, no? Or the teacher organizing a field trip of students down to Mr. Betson. Mr. Betson can give them a talk about the work that he does and how he does certain aspects, the tools that he uses, and that sort of thing, no? So that's the non-formal, where the formal and the non-formal intersect. The role of the state parties at the international level. Reporting to the committee. That's one. By the way, the Grenada has already done that. So congratulations. It was a very tedious task, I can tell you that. They pay a contribution to the ICH fund. What are the rights? You have a right to participate in the organs of the convention. You have a right to international cooperation and exchange. You have a right to apply for international assistance, which you have already done. You have a right to submit nomination files. As I said, when you go through this process of inventorying, one of the days will come where you said, you know what, let's put something up at the international level. We want the world to see that this is an element of Grenada that we are proud to share, right? More recommendations. State parties try to cooperate with other state parties by developing regional networks of communities and expertise to safeguard shared heritage. Maybe you want to do a collaborative initiative with other states on Carnival. Maybe you want to do a collaborative initiative with other states on masks or food, or string band music, or you know, you want to share documentation with each other. I'm wondering to what extent information about Grenada might be available in other states. I'm just asking, I don't know, right? Engaging in regional cooperation, for example, through Category 2 centers, which is an operational directive 88, and concerned shared ICH. So through a Category 2 center, Category 2 centers are specialized centers in the region that assist with ICH in particular. Other conventions have Category 2 centers in different areas, but we're talking here about ICH. I think there's a Category 2 center in Mexico, and another one in which is another one in South America. But we can explore that further. I know there's a proposal behind the scenes right now to try and propose a regional Category 2 center. Yuri might be more familiar with this in the region. The role of communities, and we'll try and wrap up here in the next 3 minutes for this segment. What role do you as community members play? You help to identify and define the ICH as per Article 11. You participate in inventory of ICH. You prepare nominations to the list and register of the convention. Remember yesterday we talked about the representative list, the urgent safeguarding list, and the register of good practices. So if the state is going to send any nomination to UNESCO at that international level, if it's not evident that the communities were involved in preparing that nomination, it will be referred back to the state. Look, Grenada, your communities did not participate in preparing this nomination. Please wheel and come again. No? Developing and implementing safeguarding plans for their ICH. So you develop and implement your own plans. Now, a lot of times, two sides of the coin, no? Sometimes state actors want to tell communities what to do, and sometimes the communities want to tell the state what to do. You have to know what the cultural dynamic is in Grenada, no? Some communities are not have a passive aggressive, no? Or passive resistance. You don't want to hear nothing from the state, but you want the state to hear from you, right? So sometimes if you want to implement particular plans of safeguarding ICH, you have to negotiate that, you know? See how the two can meet somewhere in the middle, right? Using the available structures within the state. Communities are also responsible for awareness raising. So what does that look like at the state, in community level? This is where you have, let's see, using Carnival, awareness raising would be Brenda doing an interview with the media, interviewing Brenda, and Brenda talking about all the preparations underway for Carnival and some of the things that are happening tonight and tomorrow, and why it's important that we continue to keep this tradition alive. And awareness raising would be Miss Margaret doing a pot of oil dung. Is that what it's called? oil down, is it?
The national
Right?
dish, yes, is oil
Yeah,
down.
right. And why this is the history behind oil down, and this is why it's made this way, and that sort of thing. That's the community doing its awareness raising, no? So you see here a list of 8 things. Communities can identify, they participate in inventorying, in the documentation. We're going to get the communities in Carriacou to do the documentation and research. Now they will no longer be the subject of the research. Well, they can be the subject and the object, no? Is that correct? Does that make sense? They'll be the actor, they'll be able to document themselves. Communities participate in revitalization. Communities ensure access to places and materials. Keep in mind, when you go into communities, it's not everything that's there that you can see, no? They might not want you to see everything and you have to respect that. Communities participate in transmission through education and through awareness raising. Suggestions in the ODs: network with other communities, network with experts, research centers, and NGOs, right? Their capacities are to be reinforced where needed. So one of the things that I used to like to do is to work in communities and train them in documentation, right? With their phones and their little voice recorders and so on, right? You can do that in very small groups at the community level, reinforce the communities. Work with community centers and associations to help them safeguard their ICH. The role of NGOs, expert centers of expertise and research institutes, similar to the state and that of the communities. Raise awareness, this is Grenada National Trust. Identify and define, that's a project, proud of my heritage. Inventorying, proud of my heritage. Safeguarding, proud of my heritage. Research, this is something that I am picking up that we'll need to work on. Though some work exists and we need to find where those are. Preparing nomination files. Preparing nomination files. This is something the state might want to think about in the future. Collaborate and network and train in ICH management and safeguarding the museums and the different organizations that are here, right? Some specific roles are reserved for accredited NGOs and individual experts. Now, you have, and this is something I want to address in more detail with the Grenada National Trust. The convention does allow for accredited NGOs to become parties to the convention. There's what is called an NGO forum, no? That participate at the international level. And you can even participate through being invited to international meetings on ICH. You even can send experts to sit on the evaluation body, right? I don't know of any regional NGO that's accredited currently to the convention, but certainly that's a possibility. If you are strong enough at the community level, certainly something to think about. And yeah, I just mentioned that, and we can talk about that some more. This is their webpage, the NGO, the ICH NGO forum. So you see that there's a specific role for NGOs in the convention. No? And that brings us to that section, who does what? So we were talking about the role of communities, groups and individuals, the role of the state, the role of NGOs, the role of research institutions. Think of that circle and all its possible participants involved in a single element or in ICH elements as a whole in Grenada, right? So what I want you to be thinking about as you're sitting in your Zoom room, as you're sitting in the Koyaba conference room, think about what role you play in ICH safeguarding currently, and what potential role you can play in ICH safeguarding going forward. All right, what we'll do, we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back for segment 2. Ezra, over to you for any housekeeping matters there?
Can you repeat, Nigel?
Yeah, we will be taking a 10-minute break now because
Yes.
we've covered quite a bit.
Just,
And then,
went over, just 5 minutes we went over. You're doing fine.
Okay, that's good. What we can do, guys, when we come back, Ezra, if maybe you could help me manage this, because this is I know we can get we want to get out what we have to say, no? But if a couple, maybe representatives of tourism, culture, the museums, people at a cross section of persons in this meeting, if you could just say a word about where we are, just that, where are we with respect to our roles in safeguarding ICH? Just an honest reflection, where are we? Right? Somebody from tourism, somebody from culture, somebody from education, somebody from the trust, somebody from practitioners, and so on. And so we'll just take 5 minutes and we won't comment. We just want to hear, where are we when we come back? No? Where are we? Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. Thank you then. So we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Is that right?
Let's say 10:16.
10:16. All right. Thank you then. We'll see each other in a minute. Where are we? Yeah, go grab some coffee. Yeah.
Let me go. I'm going to the. Let me go to the reception.
No, and I called them at 9 to